it on?
Yep.
Okay. Just a heads up for those of you that aren't here. You missed my presentation, so now you get to watch it on video. And also, we're meeting at Doc Lacey's at 11 a.m. on Friday to discuss the syllabus, so be there or be square. We want your opinion. Today, I'm going to talk to you guys about my story, focused essentially on drugs and alcohol. But as you've learned this semester so far, I hope is that it's never an isolated problem. I'm not the typical, I wouldn't say I was the typical alcoholic story, because usually when you hear about those, you hear about somebody that ended up in the gutter, you know. I ended up in the gutter of my mind, but not in the physical sense did I lose support and physical environment. I had family and those kind of people around me. And this is my testimony that I usually give to Celebrate Recovery, but I'm going to alter it a little bit because Celebrate Recovery has some really stringent rules on how you say it. I'm going to try to make it more applicable to a social problems class, so we'll see. And like I said, there's more than just drugs and alcohol involved. There's pornography, codependency, and some of that I'll mention, but I want to make sure that I'm talking to you about the problem of substance abuse and how anybody can be affected. I mean, it's not just people who were abused as children or grew up in poverty, obviously, because you hear about the people in Hollywood all the time going to rehab, but sometimes those people don't really seem real to me. I don't know about you, but sometimes they seem like film characters. They're not really, you don't see the real side of them. It's hard to see because Hollywood, that's their job, just project some image. Well, I'm just a poor farm boy born in Greensburg, Kansas in 1954. So that puts me into the era of the baby. I'm the kind of the last part of the baby boom babies after World War II, and the beginning of the really cultural changes that came on to our country in the 60s. You didn't really see it in 54, I don't think. You might have, I don't know, I was a baby, I don't remember, but I can tell you when I was in grade school and junior high, that's when things really started to change. I think I was in junior high when Woodstock happened, because I remember thinking I wanted to be there, because I thought it was so cool. It might have been what high school I went to, it was freshmen through seniors, so it might have been early part of high school too, I'm not sure. I could have looked that up, but it's neither here nor there. My dad was a farmer, my mom and dad farmed. My mom was a homemaker. My dad was respected. Cecil View was a name very well respected in the community. I grew up in the middle of a farming, in about 4 miles outside of town, in the middle of a Mennonite, the old style Mennonite community where they had their own church out there, and when I was growing up, they didn't have radios. They'd order vehicles, but they'd order vehicles without radios. They didn't watch TV. They grew beards, and they had, it was more kind of in between Amish and then there's a modern Mennonite too that was in town, their church there. But in my community, my dad was respected by all those people. Everybody respected him, even if they didn't, the religion didn't agree or whatever. I was Cecil View's son, last son. My brother was 10 years older than me, and my sister was 8 years older than me, which always made me think maybe they just really didn't plan on having another kid. I don't know, because my mom would have been 42 or 43 in 1954 when she had me, which I think that was kind of unusual back then. And she had problems birthing me and all that stuff. So that's my joke, is that I gave him trouble from the very beginning, coming out breech, and my mom, had to deal with that later. I think from physically had to have some hysterectomy and things like that. I don't know for sure about all that. Actually, my family did have my mom had a baby. I had a sister who was stillborn that would have been older than my brother, I think a year or two older than my brother. So, but that, I just always remember going to the cemetery with her, and she was my mom was very caring for her relatives. We'd go to the cemetery and every Memorial Day and we put flowers on all the graves. I remember doing that with her. We had a great aunt, I had a great aunt, on my mom's side, that she visited regularly and made sure she was okay. She never got married, and my mom was kind of a social worker. That's maybe where I got the social work part. And I remember visiting her mom, my grandma, who I don't remember her being very friendly, particularly, she wasn't mean, I just don't remember having much of a relationship with her. But I do remember she had remarried and my grandpa, and he was the grandpa. I mean, every time I go over there, he had milk and cookies, and we played Chinese checkers or rook. He taught me to play rook, and all these, we always did something fun. I suppose my mom, she did a lot of club meetings, like she joined all the clubs. She was a housewife, farm wife, so she didn't have to, she didn't have to go to a job, although, farming, the housewife that is your job, moving equipment moving the vehicles from one field to another and helping Dad, and cooking meals. I mean, huge, beautiful meals. She was a home ec teacher before he married her. We had you didn't just have pie for dessert, you had pie and cake, especially if you had company. She was an excellent cook. So that was my ideal childhood. And I grew up on a farm. My brother left, my sister, I remember being very devastated when they left for college when I was just in grade school, it seems like. I was just a little kid and they left to college, because he was 10 years older than me. And I remember crying at the window, because I really missed him. That was kind of spoiled by them too. I mean, not kind of spoiled, but spoiled. But they left, and then it was sort of like I was left on the farm with my mom and dad, and my dad worked all the time and my mom worked in the house, and as I was growing up, I learned to cook with my mom, and then later on, I started farming with my dad, probably 8 or 9 years old. I would drive the tractor over the lunch hour and keep the tractor going. It was really a sneaky way to teach me to get involved with the tractor, and I wanted to. I mean, it was exciting for an 8 or 9 or 10-year-old kid. It was, I want to drive the tractor. It didn't take very long to figure out when you started doing it for 6 or 8 hours at a time, it wasn't much fun. And I remember this kind of being lonely out there, and I climbed trees. My dad had planted trees apparently when they remodeled everything and had the extension service involved in it. So we had ponderosa pines that were huge, and I remember climbing trees, and my mom used to say, if you couldn't find me and you want to know where I was, just go outside and look up. I'd be in a tree somewhere. And I remember getting to the very top and seeing how far I could see, and sitting on a tree that would go like this in the wind. Kansas has lots of wind, so anyway. Things started getting kind of weird, and so it was kind of empty, kind of silent. That's the worst thing I could say about my childhood. I mean, my dad took me rock hunting when he wasn't working, and I chased lizards and snakes, but he was an old rock hound. He liked to, I think he wanted to go, he was going to college and quit because they ran out of money back in the Depression, and he wanted to be a geologist. And so this was his way of pursuing his interest without getting a degree and having fun. And my brother said once he told him that if he had stayed in college, he probably would have been out hunting uranium in Utah or somewhere, I don't know, Wyoming, wherever you hunt uranium. Because back then that was the big thing with atomic power and all that. Uranium was it was the magic word back then. It's kind of strange when I was a kid. When I was 8 years old, there was a revival at our church. I was, I don't know how it all happened, but I remember very specifically being called. They called us, and they worked with the kids specifically in the Methodist church is where I grew up. They worked specifically with the Methodist kids, and I remember being called, going down to the altar, and there was an low altar in front of the Methodist church, and I remember a lot of us kids were up front. The pastor said, if you feel like you're called to a ministry of some sort, come forward, or he said something like that. And I really did feel it. I felt, my mom was really religious, was spiritual and went to a lot of church and taught Sunday school. My dad was not so much. He was a good old Ten Commandment guy. He believed in doing the right thing, but he didn't have much use for church. He didn't have much respect for most pastors. And there's a reason for that. But the pastor of the revivalist called us down, and I remember going down there and giving my life to Christ. And I remember turning down, I was kneeling, and I turned down, and I saw a couple of my friends down on the other wing of this, and they were giggling and cutting up down there and doing this. They were probably just nervous. But I remember just being horrified that they didn't take it seriously. And then when I got up from there and walked back, I remember again being horrified, thinking, what's my dad going to say? Because I wanted to please my dad. He never said anything. He never said anything bad, good, bad, or ugly. He just did what he always did in church, sits like this, real severe look on his face. And he'd stand up and sit down with my mom when he did the hymns, but he never sang. He was a little angry with the church, I think. But he was a very contained individual. He didn't lose his temper. So anyway, so that was that. And then I remember in grade school, I started, my first hint of something being kind of out there was, I remember some of the kids in my class talking to them and hearing them talk about sexual things. Or they'd cuss. And my dad didn't cuss. I mean, maybe darn, I mean, I just didn't hear that growing up, and it was like, and I didn't like it, but there was also a part of me that liked it. It was kind of like, wow. And they would talk about sex stuff, and maybe they'd have a little weird magazine thing, pornography piece or something they'd share. Boys being stupid boys. We were stimulated by that stuff, and so I just remember that kind of being the first crack in the shingles, so to speak, of the roof of my life. And I was rebellious in the 4th and 5th grade. I remember once I cheated on it. I was kind of rebellious anyway because I was a spoiled, rotten brat. But I remember having this teacher. I didn't like to study. And you get around the 4th or 5th grade, they start expecting you to do homework and study and take tests. And I remember sitting right at the front of the class, like this would be where the teacher was sitting, and I was sitting. She had me sitting right in front of her. And we took a test, and I remember when I was taking the test, I just happened to glance up at her desk, and there was the key to the test was laying right there. I could read it, and I cheated. And I remember when I came back to class the next time, she made this big deal about how Bill View made 100%, and she was so proud of me. And I just, And I made kind of a vow not to cheat ever again because I hated that feeling. I just didn't, because I was raised to be moral, right? I mean, I was raised to be a good person. I wasn't given the discipline I needed to do it, but I was, in a lot of ways, but I was raised to be a good person. So that was kind of the first kind of things that I remember. And the second thing was about 6th grade. My brother went to school at Kansas State University, and my sister was at Wichita State. And my parents would send me up there on the weekends because I wanted to go, and they'd invite me to come or whatever. I don't know who made the arrangements, but I would go up. I'd ride, a lot of times I'd take the bus up there as a young kid, get on the bus and ride up to Kansas State, hang out with my brother for a weekend and come back, and my sister and my brother-in-law too at Wichita. And I remember Pizza Hut was invented back then, and we'd go out and eat pizza. Tacos, fast food tacos were invented, and it was like this big deal. I got to go out with my brother-in-law especially. He was really big on all that stuff. And he was he wanted to be a pro in something, sports, and so we'd always go bowling or shoot pool or go play tennis. We were always doing something together. It was a blast. But the key to this story is that he and my brother-in-law, especially my brother-in-law, had a whole room full of Playboys. And then later on it was Penthouse and Playboys. But he had probably Playboys that are valuable, because they were so old. He had collected them since he was a kid. And so here was a 6th grader and my brother had Playboys laying around his apartment wherever he lived and wherever I visited him. So here's a sixth grader that's exposed to this kind of stuff. It'd be like having the internet turned on in front of you. That's the best you could do because there wasn't any internet back then. But that was like, just like, you know, I could click, as many pictures, as many stories, and I'd read the stories. They have a lot of BS letters in those magazines about all these escapades these people do, and the really strange thing is that was more seductive than anything else. The other thing about going to my brother and brother-in-law was that my brother especially would always have beer in the fridge. And I remember my first beer, I thought I'd be cool. He had to go to class, and he said I could try one if I wanted one. You know, he was pretty laid back, and so I popped my beer, my Coors, and I tried to drink that crap, and it tasted horrible. But I kept trying to, I just know it's got to be cool. So I kept trying to drink it, and I never did finish a can. But my brother was drinking, so I thought it was cool. And I remember going back home and telling my friends, my sixth grade friends, how cool I was, you know, because I got to see this pornography. I don't know if I bragged about that, but I did brag about the beer. I remember that, thinking that was really cool, even though I couldn't even finish it. I also got in trouble with some friends who had worked for a family in town, and he was doing some yard work or something, and this family had kept cash in the basement. And it was so stupid because we'd go down to the local lunch restaurant to eat lunch because we didn't like to eat lunch at the high school. And after we ate, they said, "Come with us, and you stand outside, and we'll go in, and we'll give you some money." Oh, okay. And so that's what they did. They went inside, and this guy kept several $100s apparently in the house just as a cash. And they'd seen it working at his house, and they took it. And then my dad found out later, and it was just a big scene. And I felt horrible again. And it was the first time I saw my dad cry. He and I both cried when, after they'd come out to the house, the other kids' dads had come out to the house to tell my dad what had happened. And he called me down and said, "Bring it with you." That's all he said. And I brought the money down, and it was just horrible, and gave it to him. And then we were just standing at the door, and I just looked at him, and I was crying. And he reached his arms out to me, and he cried. And I'd never seen that happen. He didn't show his feelings. But I remember that really strong. So I used to work on the farm, obviously. I ran into a couple of people. I became fascinated with marijuana around that time, around junior high. Woodstock was going on. Timothy Leary was advertising how LSD, tune in, turn on, drop out. And I remember specifically talking to one of my friends. We'd go and spend the night, and talk and we'd listen to rock music, all kinds of stuff that was all coming out. The revolution, so to speak, of our society at that time. And we were all wanting to be a part of that. And I remember telling somebody I'd probably try some marijuana, but I'd never try LSD. And I kept going up to the upperclassmen, the people that were above us that we knew were messing around, and kept trying to get them to give us some pot. And I said I wouldn't drink beer because that was the man. The man drinks beer. That wasn't cool. That was like the establishment. And it's that wouldn't be cool because I changed by then. I was more cool. And I went up to this one guy, Craig, and I kept bugging him. We became friends, and eventually he'd have me collect all the money from my friends, and I'd give it to him, and he'd go to Wichita to get the marijuana. Well, then they come back with this story how they didn't have enough money, they couldn't find any marijuana, and it cost more than they thought, and that I should give them just here. He gave me a little bit. I distributed it to my friends, and then he gave me some LSD because they did have that, and I ended up taking that. I took my first LSD trip at a Methodist retreat, youth retreat. This is not a good idea, boys and girls, because with any of these drugs, and if you have a sense of moral right or wrong, you're right there in the worst place you could be. And with LSD and those kind of mind-altering, literally mind-altering drugs, they change how you think and how you feel, and you lose kind of control of who you are to a certain extent. And you feel guilty. I felt guilty, and it wasn't how they would Timothy Leary would say you want your setting and set. Your setting, the way your mind's set, you want your mindset right, you want your setting right. You don't do it at a Methodist retreat. And something else. And I even studied this stuff to make sure I was doing it right, you know. And I didn't do it right that night, but I didn't flip out or get in any trouble, although I can't imagine that the youth ministers didn't know something was wrong with me, because I was acting pretty bizarre. I remember being in a pup tent with 3 other guys, and the pup tent changed into this gigantic circus tent. That's how it appeared to me. So, pretty bizarre. And they were freaking out because they didn't do any. They were watching me, you know, acting like an idiot. So that sort of, and then it sort of made me obligated to my friends to try to get them, so I'd go and bug this guy to pay us back for the money. And it sort of started this distribution thing that I would do, not really drug dealing, but I would distribute drugs to my friends. I'd find out who had it, and then I'd take their money and we'd go get it, and we'd try not to get ripped off, all that stuff. And I remember specifically thinking that in order to do this, and the LSD was available. It wasn't like it went away. It wasn't like once in a while it was around. It was there all the time. And I remember we'd go down to a ranch that was kind of isolated. We tried to do the setting right. We'd go down to a ranch and camp out to do it. And we do it probably every other weekend for a couple of summers. But I remember thinking, I'm going to kind of have to take a break from my MYF club, my Methodist Youth Group Club, and my Methodist Youth Fellowship. I'm going to have to take a break because this doesn't fit with that, right? Doing drugs and I was just going to take a little break and experiment a little bit, and then I'd come back. Well, I didn't come back for a long time. And I started drinking beer around sometime in high school, because beer was easier to get than marijuana. You could just pay some upperclassmen to go get it for you. And they had, in my town, they didn't have a liquor store. It was a dry county, but there was cereal malt beverage, so you could have this at 3.2% beer, alcohol per content. And of course, they'd always get it for us and then warn us not to get in trouble and keep some of our change, you know, all that stuff. It was all a trip. But I remember the first time I drank beer, I really liked the feeling when because by that time I could guzzle it, I could go ahead and drink it. I was old enough, I just forced it down. I liked the feeling until I drank more than 4 and I puked. And, most people would think, man, it made me sick, don't do it anymore. What I thought, I learned I need to just not drink more than 4 or more than 3, because I like that feeling. And that, to me, that's a sign of an alcoholic. Okay, that's one of the beginning signs of substance addiction, is that rather than do the logical thing and not drink anymore because it makes me sick, those consequences don't overwhelm the feeling that I got from it. Now, I'm sure there's other people that did that and didn't become an alcoholic, but for me, that was one of the first signs. Because some people drink it socially and maybe got sick once and they, I'm not going to ever drink that much again, and they never drink that much again. But I drank that much again. I said, I'm never going to get sick again. I got sick again. In fact, I got sick. I experimented with that, and there was marijuana occasionally, but not as often as, say, the LSD and alcohol. And alcohol was so easy to get that became more the drug of choice, even though it wasn't, in my mind, the drug of choice. It was, in reality, the drug of choice, because it was the one I did. And I didn't quit doing it. I did not do it because there was other things around, or if there was this, I kept doing it. When I tried to drink liquor, what I discovered was that I would get so drunk so fast that I would get sick almost immediately, because I didn't have you only want to drink one drink at a time. I always kept it full, so I drank compulsively from the beginning. So beer was easier to control because it had less alcohol content and it filled you up faster. But you could still get sick on it if you tried to drink it too fast. But with mixed drink, you can make it as strong as you want, and that meant you'd get so much in at once that you get sick fast. And so some point in my career, I figured out that I didn't want to do liquor very much. I just kind of stayed away from it. It cost me too much. The consequences of liquor weren't worth it. But beer's fun. I can do beer. I continued that throughout high school on weekends. I would go out on the weekends. That was what I looked forward to. I would try to find somebody to go with because I like the social aspect of it, and especially if I got somebody that didn't drink. I like to take people out who were kind of virgins to it and, show them how much fun it was. And I remember a lot of times, some of those people I'd say on a Friday night we'd go out and we'd get really messed up, and then I'd be dropping them off at home or something, because I didn't have my own car, but my parents always let me use their car. I'd be dropping off at home and they'd say, hey, you want to go out tomorrow night? I'd say, no, man, I don't want to do that. And, they didn't want to do what I was doing. I was doing something that was fun once, and then they didn't want to do it anymore. Very few, maybe once in a while they'd go out with me, but they wouldn't do it like I do it. I'd want to do it every night of the weekend. If I had it, I could get it, I wanted to do it. So I was, right from the beginning, pretty much an alcoholic, I would say. I had relationships during this time with one girl in high school who was 1 year older than me. She went off to college, and that was sort of the end of that until I went to college, and it was a mess. She drank, and because she drank, that's probably why we were together. She was a very nice person too. But you pretty much had to drink to be with me, or you had to tolerate it. And she drank a lot. She didn't like drugs at all, but she drank along with me, and it was a mess. It broke up, obviously. And I went to Kansas University, and that was my mecca. The thing that I thought of, I just got to get out of this small podunk town, right? 2,000 people. I got to get out of this town. So Lawrence, Kansas was like, I can't wait to go. Because you'd read in the paper, actually the year before I went, they actually did burn the Union because of, I just heard recently, it wasn't because of the Vietnam War, it was because of something else. Now I can't think of why it was. The myth I had was they were having demonstrations against the Vietnam War, but it wasn't that. It was something else to do with women's rights or something, and they went crazy and set it on fire, set the student union on fire. And then the year I went, the Vietnam War was over, the draft was ended, and they ended the war. So I went to Kansas University, and basically what was left was the drugs and the partying, the hippie lifestyle. And I thought I was in heaven, except I was in a dorm in Oliver Hall, freshman dorm with no car, and but they obliged the sororities and fraternities on campus would have keg parties of cereal malt beverage out right at the beginning, like the rush week. There'd be free beer everywhere. So my cousin went to school at the same time. He's my age, the poor guy. Hooked up with me, and I got him drunk, and I remember him trying to ride his bicycle down the hill, and this is kind of funny, and he knows about this story, so he obviously knows about this story. He fell off of his bike going down the hill, and he finally found me again, came up to the dorm, and he was all scratched. It was really sad. I feel bad. I'm sorry, Baxter. Really sorry. And he didn't follow my lifestyle. He did a little bit of partying in college, but he didn't do the same thing I did. But I partied. If I could get beer, I partied. And then it didn't take very long for people in the dorm to find out who smoked marijuana, and we all started hanging out together. And there was guys up on the 10th floor who sold LSD, and we'd do that once in a while. And that one kind of ended my LSD period, because at one point I was really drunk one night on a Friday night, and we went up, my friend and I went up there to get some LSD, and I knew what I knew, but I didn't know as much as I thought I did. And this guy had what they called four-way window pane LSD, and I asked the guy that was selling it how much he took, and he said, I just take a whole one. Well, four-way meant 4 hits. It was 4 times the amount that you needed. And I woke up in the middle of a drunken party, because LSD changes your mind even when you're drunk. And I couldn't stand to be with them. They were acting retarded in my mind. And I tried to commit suicide, climbing out the window. And these retarded people pulled me back in, thank God for them. And one nice gal that kind of liked me kept track of me for several hours, and then until I came down far enough to be able to think rationally again. And that sort of burned me on the LSD. But alcohol and marijuana flowed freely there. There was all different kinds of marijuana. So I was doing a lot of substance abuse. My parents paid for my college, so I didn't have to worry. That was my scholarship. I didn't have to go to, to earn it. Don't ever do that. So I basically, that's what my joke is. I went to school for 2 years there and majored in party and got A's. But I nearly flunked out a lot of different classes. Met my first real love there, fell in love with her. She liked to smoke marijuana, but I don't know if she had a drug problem or not. She had a bill problem, I think, but that didn't work out because she didn't want to go back and be a farm wife when I gave up I couldn't do college anymore because I couldn't do it. She didn't want to go back and be a farm wife. She was an artist, and so she stayed there. And I left and had my heart was completely broken, and I went just downhill with my drinking. Unfortunately, in some ways, you can't really regret the past because I had met my first wife, or I knew her from Greensburg, and when I went back for the summer before the junior year I quit, we had gotten together because my girlfriend and I were on the rocks, sort of, and so we got together, and so she was my ace in the hole. If my girlfriend, I made one more chance to get my girlfriend to go with me, and she didn't go, so I went back and married my wife. And it's very sad because I was an alcoholic, I was a drug distributor, I liked doing it, I was addicted to distributing drugs. I liked being the man, the guy with the connections. And I got married, and I remember riding around with the tractor working for my dad and crying. When there was a love song on the radio, I'd cry over, and I'm already married to somebody else, and I'm crying over this broken heart. So it was really messed up. I mean, it was really messed up. I remember it being the most horrible time of my life. My wife and I, at the time, we had a young man. That's why I say you can't regret the past, because we had a baby, finally. Probably had trouble having a baby because of my own addictions. But we had a baby, and that was the most fantastic thing. That was the brightest spot in my life, is to see my son born, because I was there. And being a drug addict or an alcoholic, you always think of us as not having any morals. I had a lot of morals. I believed in a lot of things, but I couldn't control myself. I was totally out of control. But I really believed in having my baby. That son of mine was just the most, they even had us come back to Lamaze and talk about our experience because I was so excited about it. And I managed to stay fairly sober for that, so I didn't screw that up. But eventually, I think probably my son was about a year and a half old. My wife got tired of me not coming home at night and hanging out with my buddy who came to work for me, and I was drinking beer at 10 o'clock in the morning, and she left me. And within a year, she divorced me. But within the week that she left me, because she was putting the clamps down on me to be a distributor of even marijuana. She didn't want me to get in any trouble, She didn't mind me getting it for us, but she didn't want me to get in any trouble. So, but when she left me, my buddy who was working for me brought this guy out who had cocaine. And cocaine that was probably as potent in the 1980s as you can get. It was almost instantly addictive for me. I'm sure for most people that did it. And it was a very expensive habit. And so in order to do it, I thought I had to sell it. And so I had to sell it to have enough to do it. And it just started this horrible downward spiral. Now, all through my high school, once before when I was married I was married the first time, my parents knew I had a problem and they tried to get me to go to, I can't remember if that was my first marriage or my second marriage. But they made me go to DUI school, even though I didn't get a DUI. They made me go to this DUI school, and it was second marriage because or it might have been in between, because I remember thinking I have to go to DUI school. It's Saturday morning at 8 o'clock, and guess what, almost every night, that's when the cocaine would show up on Friday night. And I'd stay up all night. You can't sleep on cocaine, you can't eat. And so I'd end up staying up all night and showing up at the DUI school wasted. And this guy had to know, I mean, he knew something was going on. I kept sniffing, it was a horrible experience. But that didn't stop me. That's the thing, is that I could not stop it on my own. I met my second wife during that time. So that tells you how healthy our relationships were. I was then. I was distributing drugs and drinking like a fish. The bad thing about cocaine is it keeps you awake, so you can drink as much as you want, and not get sick usually, and not go to sleep. You can party all night. As long as you have enough money, you can do anything you want with it. You can fry your brain to pieces. And I met her, and she got pregnant, and I basically demanded that she marry me because I had morals. Even though I was carrying guns and selling drugs, I had morals. I believed in she was the. So anyway, that happened, and shortly, and then it was like my daughter was born, and I didn't get to be there for that birth because it's a C-section. I think all the doctors knew that my wife couldn't handle a regular birth, and so we had a C-section, but I got to hold my daughter right afterwards, and it was wonderful, but I was just kind of half there. And that's when my parents started making me go to counseling. My wife and I would go to counseling, drug and alcohol counseling, on Wednesday nights, and we'd go out to the bar afterwards. And then finally there was this big fight. My buddy and I had gone to Dodge City and got some cocaine. And I said, you can drink as much as you want, but that doesn't mean that you don't have blackouts and not remember what you did, even though you're walking around acting like you did. And I came home, the door was locked, and that ticked me off, so I just kicked the door in. I'd done that before. I couldn't find my keys, or somebody locked the door and forgot, or whatever. I kicked the door in, and my buddy and I were walking around through the house. And the other thing about people that OD on methamphetamine or cocaine, and when I say OD, they do too much. They didn't